Good morning, and welcome to the Division of Materials and Waste Management's webinar on revisions to Ohio Administrative Code Rule 3745-27-12, also known as Rule 12. This rule covers explosive gas migration monitoring at solid waste landfill facilities. This rule package will become effective July 1st, 2021. This rule was the result of substantial collaboration between Ohio EPA Division of Materials and Waste Management, also known as DMWM, and the Regulated Communities Trade Organization, National Waste and Recycling Association, NWNRA. This webinar will be recorded and later posted on our webpage for viewing at a later time. It is my pleasure to share this revised rule package with you today. With that said, again, I welcome you to the DMWM's webinar for the Rule 12 revisions. Let's get started. Here is the list of items which have been revised that we will be discussing today. Rule 12 has not been significantly reviewed and revised since 1994. Thus, we needed to update it to reflect changes in the statute, current conventional thinking, and various language cleanup. We hope this refinement of the rule will provide greater clarity for both the agencies that oversee solid waste facilities as well as those regulated by this rule. As a side note, since there were more than 50% revisions to the rule, we were required to rescind the previous rule and draft a new one. However, you will find sections with very similar, if not exact language as before, as well as these revisions. Rule 12 was promulgated as emergency legislation in 1988. Following the unexpected explosion of a home and other structure located near a closed landfill. Today, with 30+ years experience of implementing this rule, we have had the opportunity to actually see how explosive gas, methane, behaves at many of our older sites. Having this extensive experience, we took a look at our universe of landfills and determined that we could offer more flexibility. Thus, this rule applies to the following types of facilities. 1, a licensed solid waste landfill that accepted waste on or after June 1st, 1994. 2, a previously licensed closed solid waste landfill that meets the following. A, ceased solid waste acceptance after May 31st, 1988, and has an occupied structure located within 1,000 feet of waste placement. 3, a previously licensed closed solid waste landfill facility that meets the following. A, ceased solid waste acceptance between July 1st, 1970 and May 31st, 1988, and has received notification from Ohio EPA that this rule applies. 4, a solid waste landfill facility for which a new or revised explosive gas monitoring plan is required pursuant to an order of the director. This is where the flexibility comes in. This rule may not apply to the following facilities. A previously licensed closed solid waste landfill facility that ceased waste acceptance after May 31st, 1988, but does not have an occupied structure within 1,000 feet of waste placement. Or B, a previously licensed closed solid waste landfill facility that ceased solid waste acceptance between July 1st, 1970 and May 31st, 1988, but has not received notification from Ohio EPA that this rule applies. Due to revisions in the Ohio Revised Code 3734.041, Explosive Gas Monitoring Plan for Landfills, that's the actual law, and updated clarification of language, we have some new definitions. Alternative Monitoring Device, AMD. This means any type of device other than an explosive gas monitoring probe where the presence and concentration of landfill gas can be measured, such as punch bar or slotted PVC pipe in the ground or a geoprobe. Responsible party. This includes the following types of individuals. Owner or operator of a solid waste landfill. Any current or former owner of a closed solid waste landfill. Any person who was responsible for the operations of a closed solid waste landfill. Any lessee or other person who has control of the property on which a closed solid waste landfill is located. A receiver appointed to a solid waste landfill or closed solid waste landfill, or a trustee in bankruptcy. Threat is defined in Ohio Revised Code 3734.041 as explosive gas levels at or above 5% by volume in air at the facility boundary is considered a threat to human health, safety, or the environment. Facility boundary means one of the following. 1, the solid waste landfill boundary as depicted in the effective permit, or 2, the property line of all the parcels that contain the limits of solid waste placement. As you might imagine, over the years since the legislation became effective in 1988, we have seen many explosive gas monitoring plans submitted, reviewed, and authorized by the director. During that same time, Rule 12 also experienced periodic revisions, twice in 1989 and again in 1994. The explosive gas monitoring plans were authorized under whatever Rule 12 was in effect at the time of the director's approval. This posed to be quite problematic because we had authorized explosive gas monitoring plans following entirely different versions of the same rule. In an effort to level the playing field and provide consistency in the review and implementation of these plans, we needed to have all the plans working from the same set of rules. To achieve this goal, we developed a schedule for the various types of solid waste landfill facilities to review, evaluate, and submit, if necessary, an explosive gas monitoring plan that complies with this version of Rule 12. Let's walk through the updating process. It's not as difficult as it may sound. For solid waste landfills operating on the effective date of this rule, July 1st, 2021, they will be responsible to review, evaluate, and submit an explosive gas monitoring plan that complies with these newly revised rules, using the following schedule. Upon receipt, to alter an approved explosive gas monitoring plan, or if that doesn't occur, then at the same time as the next 10-year BAT update schedule for that facility. For solid waste landfill facilities that has ceased operations prior to the effective date of this rule, the responsible party will need to submit an explosive gas monitoring plan that complies with this newly revised rule using the following schedule. Not later than 270 days after the effective date of this rule, or not later than 270 days after receipt of a notification from Ohio EPA to submit an explosive gas monitoring plan. For those types of facilities that receive notification, the solid waste landfills without an approved explosive gas monitoring plan will need to submit a new explosive gas monitoring plan that meets the requirements. Those solid waste landfills with an approved explosive gas monitoring plan will need to submit a revised explosive gas monitoring plan that meets the requirements of this rule. In the case that a newly occupied structure is built within 1,000 feet of solid waste placement, a new or revised explosive gas monitoring plan that meets the requirements of this rule will need to be submitted. Those solid waste landfills without an approved explosive gas monitoring plan will need to submit an explosive gas monitoring plan within 270 days upon discovery of the occupied structure. Those solid waste landfill facilities with an approved explosive gas monitoring plan will need to submit a revised explosive gas monitoring plan within 180 days after discovery of the occupied structure. Because the revised Rule 12 has incorporated the design, sampling, monitoring, and reporting procedures within the body of the rule, the burden of developing a two-part explosive gas monitoring plan has been removed. Essentially, you only need to develop a single-part plan, thus halving the amount of work you have done in the past. The components of this relaxed explosive gas monitoring plan have changed very little from previous years. Thus, if your plan meets these requirements, you may not need to make many revisions at all. The plan is a standalone plan and requires only the following components. Facility site conditions, such as geologic information, landfill facility information, any gas investigations performed, and the use of topographical maps. Explosive gas management systems, such as explosive gas control or extraction structures or systems at the site. Explosive gas monitoring and networks, such as design schematic of all probes or alternative monitoring devices on site. And the appendices. Appendix A is for copies of letters sent to owners of occupied structures. Appendix B, documentation of installation of explosive gas alarms. Appendix C, hydrogeologic boring logs, if available. D, certification reports. And E, the most recent deed for the landfill property, plus any other appendices as you see necessary. Because we have seen many different designs of explosive gas monitoring probes used to detect gas migration, we wanted to provide clarification and consistency on what is an explosive gas monitoring probe and what is not. An explosive gas monitoring probe must be capable of performing or attaining these elements. Anything else is considered an alternative monitoring device, AMD. However, to be recognized as an AMD, the monitoring device must be able to perform or attain these elements. It may be a punch bar, a slotted pipe in the ground. In other words, if the explosive gas monitoring device cannot meet all the requirements identified in this rule, it may be considered an AMD. Regarding AMDs, before an owner or operator can use an AMD, they would need to receive prior authorization from Ohio EPA. The rule provides potential factors that may be used to make a determination and a demonstration for the use of an AMD. This section should not be totally unfamiliar to everyone. We have had these requirements in previous versions of Rule 12. However, we wanted to clarify the requirements of establishing an explosive gas network. As you can see, it includes alarms, probes, and/or AMDs, depending on the location of the occupied structures. Again, these requirements are not new either. We wanted to provide clarification and consistency on the monitoring frequency requirements. Licensed solid waste landfills in operation on or after June 1st, 1994 will perform monthly monitoring prior to closure if any portion of the solid waste landfill facility is not lined with flexible membrane liner. Quarterly, prior to closure, if the solid waste landfill facility is lined with a flexible membrane liner. Or quarterly during post-closure care period, regardless of the presence or not of a flexible membrane liner. Solid waste landfills that ceased acceptance of waste prior to June 1st, 1994, but after July 1st, 1970, they perform semi-annual monitoring. Contingency monitoring is, again, not a new concept. However, we expanded it some to ensure communication between the various parties regarding the presence of explosive gas. Notification. If the responsible party discovers explosive gas concentrations at or above 5% by volume, which is 100% of the lower explosive limit, in any probe or AMD, or 1.25% or greater by volume, which is 25% of the lower explosive limit, in any occupied structure, the responsible party is required to implement contingency monitoring. The responsible party is required to immediately notify the following individuals: the owner of the occupied structure or structures nearest or within the vicinity of the probe or AMD exhibiting the exceedance, the appropriate EPA district office and the local health department, and if the exceedance is within an occupied structure, the responsible party will need to notify the local fire department as well. When contingency monitoring is initiated, the monitoring frequency will be increased to weekly for probes and/or AMDs that exceed the LEL. The results of the contingency monitoring are to be submitted to Ohio EPA and the local Board of Health within 7 days following the contingency monitoring event. We made some slight revisions to this section of the rule. we extended the contingency monitoring period to be more than 2 weeks. We wanted to ensure that the results were a true indication explosive gas migration was abated. The responsible party may cease contingency monitoring when a minimum of 4 sequential weekly monitoring events do not exceed the lower explosive limit. The responsible party may be able to return to compliance monitoring as before or at a frequency specified by Ohio EPA. However, the first compliance monitoring event will need to take place within 2 months following the end of contingency monitoring. This requirement addresses those sites that perform semi-annual compliance monitoring. The goal here is to ensure that the results were truly representative of the situation. We did not want to potentially have 6 months pass before the next sampling results would be taken, in case there was an exceedance again. This is a concept we wanted to reinstate from a previous version of Rule 12, effective in 1989. The responsible party would need to submit and implement a remediation plan within 30 days to Ohio EPA when the responsible party is unable to abate or mitigate gas migration following 4 consecutive weeks of contingency monitoring, or after notice from Ohio EPA. The plan is to contain the following: a remediation action to address explosive gas migration, an implementation schedule for those remediation actions, and a description of how the proposed remediation will mitigate explosive gas migration. Implementation of the plan is to be within 30 days following receipt of written concurrence from Ohio EPA or at an alternate schedule authorized by Ohio EPA. If the remediation plan does not abate the migration of explosive gas, then the responsible party would need to submit a revised remediation plan within 30 days following notification from Ohio EPA that the remedy was not successful. Then implement the revised remediation plan within 14 days after receipt of written concurrence from Ohio EPA. This is also not new or highly revised section, but we wanted to clarify what should be sampled, since we have clarified our definitions of probes or AMDs. In general, we don't want the probes or the AMD vented prior to sampling, as that most likely will dilute the concentration of explosive gas within the monitoring device. It is necessary that probes or AMDs be able to accurately detect explosive gas concentrations. The gas monitoring equipment or meter should have a detection limit below 1% methane by volume. We wanted to ensure the equipment was able to detect explosive gas at both high and low concentrations. Some gas monitoring equipment can only detect the presence of explosive gas at or above 5% by volume. However, there is a big difference between 5% methane and 50% methane. It is this information that is important in making the evaluation of the severity of the situation. All probes and AMDs are to be sampled for the following parameters: peak gas concentration and ambient weather conditions, such as barometric pressure, air temperature, and observed weather conditions. Peak gas concentration is a slight change from what we have had before. In the previous versions of Rule 12, we had an initial and sustained gas concentration reading. However, the sustained reading proved to be somewhat problematic, as it was not clear how long between the initial sampling, which essentially vented the probe at the time, and the sustained reading were to be taken. Barometric pressure, air temperature, and observed weather conditions, such as snow cover, rain, or dry conditions, can all play a role in whether the gas is able to migrate up through the cap or has more potential to migrate laterally. Please note that these 2 parameters are strictly for probes. Gas pressure can be an indication of whether the gas is moving through the area near the monitoring probe and towards the facility boundary. Depth to the water provides information on whether water may be blocking explosive gas from moving towards the monitoring probe. If the screened interval of the monitoring probe is covered with liquid, The monitoring probe may not be able to accurately indicate the presence of gas. Also, by taking the measurement of the depth to water from the top of the casing, we hope to standardize the information submitted to improve evaluation consistency across the state. We wanted to standardize the monitoring process and equipment, again to establish consistency and equivalency statewide. The responsible party is to maintain a log of calibration events for all devices used to monitor explosive gas in either probes or AMDs. The log should also indicate the calibration was performed either 24 hours prior to the gas sampling event or per the manufacturer's recommendations for the specific device. The log should be current and available for review by the inspector. The calibration process. Again, we are striving for consistency across the state for the monitoring equipment. The responsible party needs to ensure the calibration gases are not expired. And yes, they do expire. As you would imagine, expired gas most likely will not provide an accurate standard for calibrating the monitoring equipment. This information should be included on the calibration log and can be found on the calibration gas tank. The concentration of the calibration gases should be between 1% to 5% methane, or as specified by the manufacturer. This is to ensure the monitoring equipment is capable of detecting explosive gas concentrations in the lower range for explosion. This section is a new requirement. As explosive gas alarms have become increasingly used to provide the owner of an occupied structure an alert for the presence of combustible gas, it has also become somewhat complicated as to who is responsible for the maintenance and operation of these alarms. The homeowner, the renter, fire department, consultant, or even Ohio EPA? The answer is the responsible party. The responsible party will be responsible for installation and maintenance of the explosive gas alarms in occupied structures with the consent of the property owner. The responsible party will also be calibrating and performing an assessment of the alarm to verify it is operating properly and able to detect explosive gas at least at 25% of the lower explosive limit or 1.25% of methane by volume. The results of this annual activity is to be documented and submitted to Ohio EPA within 30 days following the assessment event. If an alarm is found to be defective or not functioning properly per the manufacturer's specifications, the responsible party will need to replace the alarm within 24 hours after discovery. We do not specify the type or manufacturer of the alarm. Dual-purpose carbon monoxide methane alarm from a local hardware or home improvement store will suffice. If an alarm indicates the presence of explosive gas at or above 1.25% methane by volume, or 25% of the lower explosive limit within an occupied structure, the responsible party must immediately notify the homeowner, the local fire department, and the appropriate Ohio EPA district office. Well, that pretty much wraps up the revisions to Ohio Administrative Code Rule 12. Thank you so much for your interest in Ohio's explosive gas migration monitoring at solid waste landfills. We appreciate your attendance and hope you have a better understanding of these changes. However, the Division of Materials and Waste Management is available to assist you should you have questions. We have 5 district offices around the state: Twinsburg in the Northeast, Bowling Green in the Northwest, Logan in Southeast, Dayton in Southwest, and right here in Columbus in Central Ohio. Hey, thank you again and have a great day.